Welcome to the Adquio web interface course. This time we are going to see the configuration of BACnet devices. For this, we are going to divide this class into three modules. The configuration of a BACnet MSTP and TCP module. The configuration of a BACnet MSTP and TCP device. And finally, how to configure its variables. We are going to see now how to create a BACnet MSTP module. The first thing we must do is tell it that it is a BACnet MSTP module. As always, we are also going to put a unique code, such as MSTP. It means that it goes through a 485 port. We would tell it through which we know that we have 1 and 2 occupied. We are going to tell it that it is port number 3. We must indicate, as in the case of Modbus RTU, the bus speed, and the communication parameters data bits parity and stop bits. This will come from the devices we have on that bus, and as always, as we discussed in the previous case, all the devices on this bus must share this same information, both speed and communication parameters. Let's now look at the fields that are specific to BACnet MSTP. The BACnet instance number is the number on the BACnet bus, which we assign ourselves to this module. This identifier must not exist on the BACnet bus, that is, none of the BACnet devices to which we are going to connect on this bus, which can be one or more, must have the same identifier that we are going to put here. For that reason, it must be different from everyone on this bus. The MAC address is also an address for our module that must not coincide with any master on this same bus. The maximum master is the maximum number of master devices on this BACnet MSTP bus. The maximum number of frames has a lot to do with how BACnet communication works. BACnet communication is a communication in which all devices at a specific moment are masters, and for one device to transfer its role of master to another, a token must be passed. Here, what he asks us is, how many messages or how many communication frames can we send before being forced to pass the token to the next device? Normally, the default value is 5. It is possible that if we get to an existing bus, we should put the value that they indicate in this position. Timeout APDO are the initials of the application protocol data unit, and it is the waiting time before giving a request has failed, that is, when we request data from one of the bus devices, how long should we wait without receiving a response, until we consider that it's a mistake. Retries, exactly the same as in the previous request. How many communication retries must we do before giving a request has failed? That is, if we make a request and the timeout is consumed, how many times must we repeat that request before considering that the device that we are consulting is offline, and therefore communication is impossible? Very good. Well, with this, we have already seen the BACnet MSTP module and how to configure it, so that you know that this information below should normally be provided to us. If it is not done in an existing installation, the only way to get into that bus, it would be based on trial and error. We leave here without recording. Let's see now how to create a BACnet IP module. We choose the type of BACnet IP module. As always, we are going to give it a unique code. Connection port. We know that, in the Adquio Pro and Lite, we have a 1 port, and 3 LAN ports. In the Adquio Mini, we have a single port. So here what you are asking us is through which of the networks it should communicate with the BACnet device. If it is through the LAN ports, it would be through our internal network, the network that is protected after our firewall. If it is through the 1 port, it means that we are going to reach this BACnet network through our 1 port. We are going to indicate, in this case, that it is our LAN port. As in the case of the BACnet MSTP bus, it asks us for our BACnet instance number. What does this mean? That if we get to a BACnet network in which there are 4 devices, we should put a number greater than 4, so as not to collide with any of the existing ones, for example a 5. The BACnet port, this is the default port, is in hexadecimal, but in decimal it would be 47,808. They have been very nice, and have put in hexadecimal, BAC, so that it is easy to remember, I guess. Well, both timeouts and retries work exactly the same as in the previous case. Timeout is how many milliseconds we must wait until after we make a request, we consider the request as unanswered, or as failed. And retries, if this happens, how many retries should we do before giving this communication as failed? BBMD address is the initials of BACnet Broadcast Management Device, or BACnet Broadcast Device. It would be our intermediary to access the BACnet network. We send our requests to this device, and it would distribute it through broadcast, which means that one device sends, and everyone on the network receives it simultaneously. We should indicate the IP address of this device. The port of that device, which as we see, is usually always the same, and the lifetime is the initials of time to live. It is usually 1800 seconds, and it is the time that our subscription to BACnet Broadcast Management Device lasts. Once this subscription expires, it is automatically renewed. As in the previous case, these data are not usually provided if we are going to get into a BACnet network. We also left without saving. We are going to see then how to configure a BACnet MSTP device, and first of all, I must tell you that, in this case, we are in an Adquio that is more than 9,000 connected devices. You see that it takes a little while to load them, because there are many devices, and in this case, the list of devices does not have paging, it is loading absolutely all of them. Here we have them, they are all connected. It is a hotel with a lot of rooms, an example. And we have up to 9,368 rooms, 9,368 devices connected to a single Adquio device. Well, in this case, we are going to see as an example, a thermostat that is a UB100 thermostat, that is connected via BACnet MSTP, and also as an example, we have it connected through BACnet IP. In this way, we will be able to see both cases. We enter its addition. Very well, as always, the first thing we see is device. Effectively, within all the options, is BACnet MSTP, that is, BACnet for 485. We have put a code that is unique among all the devices of this facility, and has nothing else. We could have put a name and a description, but you know this is totally optional. The reading interval has the default value, that is every 5 seconds, and now if the important data comes. What module are you using? Then logically, we must have created a module that is BACnet MSTP. In this case, it is called BACnet_RS485. The multiple read variables field allows us to define this device up to how many variables I can request from it in a block. In this case, according to the manufacturer's specifications, it has indicated that 4 are the maximum variables that I can read in a block. The device instance is the index of the device on the BACnet network that we want to poll. In this case, according to the manufacturer's documentation, and as we have configured it, it is 5003. From here, we would see the variables, but we are going to see this in the next section, because as always, we are going to see the unified ones, both the MSTP as well as TCP. We are going to see the UB100 thermostat device, but BACnet IP. We enter its addition, and we will see that, as always, we simply have what type it is, a unique code within the installation, a name, a description, the usual data. If we want to put extra data pairs of values, remember. Reading interval, in this case, it will do it every 10 seconds. Which module? Well, logically, we must use a module that is defined for BACnet IP, in this case, where we will have configured, I don't know, if you remember, in previous chapters, the IP address of this device on the IP network, and the port. As in the previous case, how many variables can be consulted in a reading? In this case, 26 variables, and the instance of the device in the BACnet network through Ethernet is 5003. In this case, we could also put the MAC address of the device on the BACnet network, but it is not required. The MAC BACnet address is calculated, and here, we have a tool to do it. Based on the IP address of the device, we are going to put an example. so that you can see it, and this generates a MAC address. In this case, we do not have it because it is not mandatory. As you can see, the configuration of a BACnet device at the device level is very simple. Simply say what it is, give it a code, choose the appropriate module, indicate how many variables can be read in a block, and indicate the instance of the device within network. With this enough. So now, we are going to see the variables of a BACnet device. Let's take a look at the variable list. First, to find out the following. We will have a list of BACnet objects, and a list of instances of each object. This is very similar to an object, and a variable of that object. An object, and the variable number of that object. We are going to see that it is true, because we have the object there, the variable 0, the variable 1, the variable 2, the variable 3, and we see that the variable 3 is repeated. But why? Because we are accessing the same variable that is room_sensor, but in one case, we are reading it natively, and, in another case, we are converting it to Fahrenheit. We are going to check it. In its converters, we see that it does not have converters, and that instead, the second 3 does have a converter that is from Celsius to Fahrenheit, but, in both cases, we are reading instance number 3. Okay. We are then going to enter a variable, and see all its fields. Well, as always, the first thing we have is a code that must be unique within the device. We always mention the same thing. We can give it a name and a description. We can give it extra data, that we remember again, that they are pairs of values, something like a field name, and field content, and now we have the 2 fields, which we have already seen, and many other previous variables, if this field supports reading and writing, or if it only supports reading. In this case, this field supports both options, because it is to set the heating manually, it would be to set it to manual or not. So, we can both read it to know if it is set to manual, and we can write it to set it to manual. The reading interval is once again every 1 second. The type is generic, because it is a value 0 or 1. The units then are not specified, because I already told you that it is a value that is turned on and off. It is a 32-bit decimal, does not have converters. We will not see this again, because we have already seen it on many previous occasions, and therefore, both in the device originally, and in Adquio are 32-bit decimals. The mappings, we have already seen them several times. We remember, once again, that the maximum and minimum values are to protect the device to know what is the minimum value that can be set in that device variable, and the maximum value, and that Adquio never enter values outside of this range. In this case, we could perfectly put from 0 to 1, okay, because they are the only values that it admits. Value correction does not make sense in this case, but I have already explained to you, on previous occasions, what it is for. It was used for analog variables, which here we should put +1 -1, depending on the error it had with respect to the calibrated measurement of its sensor in its final location. Null values, we have also seen it in previous cases, and it served to say, if this can have a 0 or 1, any value 2, 3, 4 etc. that comes here would be that it could not be read, because it is impossible for this device to give us a value other than 0 or 1. Now let's go with the device configuration fields. The BACnet object field will have to be given to us in the specifications, and it can be these analog input, analog output, analog value, binary input, binary output, binary value. Instance in the BACnet object. The BACnet object would be this, and this would be something like the variable number that we are reading. In this case, it is 0 because it is the first of this BACnet object. Okay. We saw that in the previous list, we had the variable. We had variable 1, variable 2, variable 3 and we have variable 3 repeated, because we read it twice to convert it, remember? Well, what do we want to read about this field? Well, the present value. We also have the value of out of service, but we are interested in the present value. And the real application tag, they must give it to us too, okay? This information must be provided to us. We have null, boolean, unsigned int, signed int, real, double, and enumerated. Very good, because with this, we have already seen the configuration of a BACnet variable. I remind you that All this information here, we must obtain it from the manufacturer's documentation, and with this, we are going to see an example. To see an example of the configuration of a BACnet device, I have taken a couple of screenshots from the device manual, and we are going to see from this information that it provides us with which columns we are interested in. Well, the first, and obviously, we are interested in the name of the object name, to be able to name our variable within Adquio. We are interested in the type and ID column because, from there, we are going to get both the name of the object and the number of the variable, okay? Remember this type and ID column, because it is crucial. Then we are also interested in the units column, because, from there, we are going to get the type of value, the type of variable that we must read. And of course, we are interested in the access type column, because it will tell us if that variable is read, or read and write. If it is read, you see that it has an R, and, if it is read and write it has an RW, okay. So, let's look at the first field, module ID, which has type and ID AI0, and is numeric and read-only. We go to Adquio, and we are going to enter the first variable, and see how it is configured. We see that, we have the same name that we had in the configuration. We see that it is incorrectly configured. We just saw that it had only the reader, and here it has reading and writing. Let's correct it. I remind you that this is a test Adquio, okay. And as units of measure it has generic. What we care about here is generic, because it is a configuration value. What interests us here is this, AI0. What did we see in the type and ID column? Do you remember? Analog input and 0. We are interested in the present value. Normally, this is a constant. We are always interested in this type of value, but we are never interested in whether it is out of order or not. Unless we explicitly want to read if this variable is out of service, then we would have to read this option. And this is enough. As we can see, the name of the variable has simply been indicated, which comes directly from the column on the other side, which is read-only, which also came from a column in the documentation. It is a decimal of 32 bits, which also came from there. Now we'll go over it when we come back, and, most importantly here, that this analog input AI0 type, okay? We go back and review the first one again. Module ID analog input 0 is what we configure, and since it is an ID, it means that it is an identifier of that device. Well, we know that it is going to be a numeric, and in this case, 32 bits is usually more than enough. Okay, let's move on to the next field, put output heating. It's analog input 1, and it's a percentage, and it's read-only. We go to Adquio, we see that we have it here. We enter the same name that we see in the documentation. This is again misconfigured. Decimal of 32, because to save a percentage, which is a value between 0 and 100, it is more than enough, and the same thing that we have an AI1, analog input 1 configuration, and we want to read the current value. As you can see, it is very easy. Once we know how to do it, implement the configuration of a BACnet device within Adquio, we simply have to bring the code to be able to identify them, and if we wanted, we could also copy it in the name to understand it better. We must indicate what type the variable is, read-only, or read and write. We must indicate a type of value, and we must indicate the information that comes to us in the type and ID column, which is the BACnet object type, analog input, and the instance identifier, which is clearly specified in that column, in this case the 1. And, I already tell you, we almost always want to read the current value of that variable, not if it is out of order. Okay, well, I don't think it will be necessary to do more examples because, as you can see, they are all absolutely the same. Simply with these criteria we can easily configure and create those variables in Adquio. Okay, so with this, we have finished the configuration examples of a BACnet device, and we are finished in today's class. We wait for you in the next chapter.